Welcome to the Industrial IoT Spotlight, your number one spot for insight from industrial IoT thought leaders who are transforming businesses today. With your host, Eric Walenza.
Welcome back to the Industrial IoT Spotlight podcast. I'm your host, Eric Walenza, CEO of IoT One, the consultancy that helps companies create value from data to accelerate growth. And our guest today is Brian Pawlowski, Chief Development Officer at Quantum. Quantum helps organizations unlock the potential of their growing unstructured data by making it affordable to store data for years and to access it in minutes. In this talk, we discussed how the data landscape is changing as unstructured data grows exponentially and as AI enables organizations to extract value from it. We also explored the right mix of cloud and on-prem storage options based on use case requirements, budget availability, and security considerations. If you find these conversations valuable, please leave us a comment and a 5-star review. And if you'd like to share your company's story or recommend a speaker, you can email us at team@iot1.com. Finally, if you have a research, strategy, or innovation initiative that you'd like to discuss, please email me directly at erik.walenza@iot1.com. Thank you.
Brian, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Hey, thanks, Eric. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so this, I can tell you up front, is going to be a challenging one for me. I think what you guys are doing is very on the IT side of IoT, where I'm a little bit more comfortable on the application side. So looking forward to you educating me and then the rest of the audience today.
Yeah, this should be a good conversation.
Let's start with a bit of background on you. So you're the Chief Development Officer of Quantum. You've had some interesting roles before. You were CTO of Drive Scale. You were VP of Pure Storage and the Chief Architect. You were SVP of NetApp. So you have a very deep technical background. What was it that kind of led you through these roles to where you sit today at Quantum? What was it about the problem or the company that attracted you?
I would say two things attracted me to Quantum. One, the CEO, Jamie Lerner. I met him during COVID at one of the few restaurants that were open in Santa Clara at the time. And it was a great Italian restaurant. So he has good taste in restaurants. That was a point in his favor. But as we sat at dinner talking about Quantum and his vision for what he wanted to do with the company and the product portfolio, pivoting around unstructured data and end-to-end solution for enabling people to basically derive business value from their data, from the edge to the cloud or edge to the archive, depending on how you slice the problem. I found that vision compelling. I really did. And I've been spending the past approaching 3 years, actually, basically helping Jamie implement that vision within Quantum. And I think the thing that struck me as Jamie was talking to me, this is the second part. If you look at the companies I worked for before, it doesn't take much to squint your eyes slightly and just basically note that they're single product companies. NetApp has a what they started calling a storage appliance back in the early 90s, but it's now what they call data on tap. It's the predominant portion of their revenues. And similarly for Pure Storage, they have their Purity OS and Flash Array and FlashBlade system, which are essentially different implementations of the same concept for databases and unstructured data, respectively. And DriveScale was a startup company with one product. So I had spent so much time working on one product in one product companies that at Quantum, it's a continual challenge for me. It's like keeping 6 plates spinning while I'm loading up the 7th plate. And I never did acrobatics like that, or juggling.
Yeah, and not only multi-product, but really multi-tech stack, right? You have a lot of specialized hardware, software, so it's really actually quite complex portfolio.
Yeah, our specialized hardware really is focused on we call it automation or tape business, and that is definitely built by us and custom with robots and real hardware, not just fake hardware with CPUs and stuff like that. That's fake. Real hardware involves robots zooming back and forth between racks and picking tapes and loading them into drives. That's hardware. And that is definitely custom. But I think for the rest of our portfolio, we actually make a concerted effort to use as much as we can high volume commodity. I call them commodity. Dell would call them high volume something else. They don't like the word commodity hardware. But we try to avoid anything boutique in the hardware and focus on the software value add. That's where our differentiation is.
Gotcha. Well, let's take a step back before we get too much into your portfolio and talk about this topic of unstructured data, because companies have been managing data-related challenges for a long time. It's always the question of what is different now, right? That requires kind of a new set of solutions, new architecture to manage. And I think the key here is that word unstructured, right? That companies are dealing with kind of types of different volumes and maybe using it. So can you walk us through a little bit your thought process on what is different now in terms of the type of data people are using and how they're using it? And why does that require a new set of solutions or a different solution than maybe the historical data management tools?
Yeah, this is, and do keep an eye out for that diagram I sent you, okay, picture, because it would help this bit of the conversation. So a short history lesson. I spent the early part of my career in storage. I've been in storage for a very long time. But a long time ago, a lot of the spend in IT revolved around basically the care and feeding of database systems for essentially all of the business aspects of a company. Anything else, like a long, long time ago, email and stuff like that, was just so off the radar screen for IT in terms of investment and management that it just didn't factor into their thinking. It was all about the business applications, and a lot of that revolved around database, which is where the term came for structured data. When people say structured data versus unstructured data, the simplest way to look at this is structured data is database, where it has a specific format and specific applications that access it, and very few of them, and the data footprint is rather small, actually. Unstructured data is literally everything else. That would include today, well, going forward a little bit, email, hitting the web pages, music. I'm actually looking at my diagram here, my cartoon. Music, video, which is all digital now. Okay, that's really important. I'll get back to that. Scientific data, be it telemetry data from satellites or space missions, of which we keep sending more up there, and figuring out what rockets to put them on. Or geophysical data for oil and gas exploration. And very much so in the biospaces, biopharmacy is genetics discovery, drug discovery, and mapping genomes, right? I just kind of went in a kind of a sweep through history to where we are today. The thing about all the things I just named is that not one of them is going into a database. It's they're text files, they're uncompressed or compressed video files that you sometimes stream when you want to catch the latest movie. They're the MP3s or audios that you're listening to on Spotify. And then things like self-driving cars. I have 2 Teslas, and we'll go back to that if you want to later on. The amount of data that those cars are collecting and using to develop self-driving capabilities is enormous. And they all have different formats. They are not put in databases. They're often text files or variations on it, JSON files, or these binary files that are specific formats for all the codecs for video or for audio files. The funny thing here is that 1990, everybody was worried about how do they keep their database up and running and how do they get the performance out of it. And I would say nobody cares, really. I would say the majority of the spend, they do care. But the majority of the spend in IT right now is essentially managing the deluge of unstructured data that drives their business every day, coming from so many sources. It's a fantastic complexity. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, absolutely. And there's maybe another angle that I tend to grapple with more in my day job, right? Because I'm not usually on the back end kind of helping companies figure out how to manage that data effectively. Yeah. Where I'm often is helping companies figure out what is the value of that data.
Right.
And it feels, at least from my perspective, that with unstructured data, there's a lot more uncertainty around what is the actual value of this data than with structured data. So usually with structured data, it's kind of procured for a purpose. It fits into a database, and you have kind of maybe you still discover new uses for it, but it seems that often it's fairly transparent. What are we using this data for? And with unstructured, I feel like I have a lot of clients who are basically saying, we've got all this data and we think there's a tremendous amount of value in these different areas. And we're not quite sure what the actual value is, right? Like we feel like we could be 5x more efficient in R&D potentially based on this amount of data.
Yep.
We're not really using it right now. We're not quite sure how to use it, but we just know that there's a lot of know-how, locked in that. So it feels like there's also on the business model side or the kind of the solution side, there's also a lot more uncertainty and maybe a lot of hidden value in those data sets.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the elephant I didn't point out that's all around us while we're having this conversation is AI and machine learning, right? And general AI and everything that's going on today. So all this unstructured data was coming at us from many different sources. Like my house, and I would call myself almost a Luddite personally in terms of, the smart home kind of thing. And yet I have my light switches communicating with a little hub and my mesh Wi-Fi all around the place that's essentially using Wi-Fi signal disruption to determine if there's any motion. So it's acting as a security system within my house. The plume pods, it uses all of the Wi-Fi connected devices and signal disruptions to determine motion within the house.
So I've got to interrupt you for a minute. I just had a podcast yesterday with a company called Origin AI that I don't know if it's the technology behind that, but that's exactly what they do. So
Yeah.
interesting that you brought that up. I mean, a fascinating technology.
Yeah, no. I mean, and you know what this is? It's basically taking lots of data and applying algorithms and transformations on them and some AI based intelligence to extract patterns and information. When you step back at it, it's so frigging cool. It's just that go back to 1990. This is the thing. Nobody was thinking about this. I mean, if there was somebody thinking about this, I would like to see what stocks they bought in the past 30 years, because it's simultaneously exciting and increasingly challenging, not getting simpler. And by the way, the elephant AI in the room and the machine learning, what people discovered was a lot of this data they were collecting and didn't know what to do with except maybe delete, was that they can basically feed machine learning algorithms to develop methods of kind of business analytics that gets higher fidelity as you feed it more data. And so it's created a vicious cycle or a virtuous cycle, if you want to take the positive side of it, of the more data you have and the more data you feed into your AI machine learning algorithms, the more accurate and useful it becomes. And it gives you the idea for doing more types of applications that are essentially learning applications. Data, which, by the way, has led everybody to approach the same thing I had with my garage. Don't throw out anything, keep it, because you never know when you might need it. So just keep everything forever.
That's right. That's the IT vendor's dream, right? But it, to some extent, it is the thought process now. And I guess maybe your valuation doubled, after OpenAI launched, because now companies are looking at all of this, unstructured data that's been kind of sitting around that hasn't, it's been largely useless, right? In different, files are maybe used, occasionally by somebody every 4 years, and all of a sudden we have tools that have the promise of tapping into that. Of course, then we have to bring that on premise, right? Because companies, at least with their own data sets, they're not going to upload everything even to a trusted partner like Microsoft, right? They're going to want to do a lot of this work on prem. Let's get in then a little bit to how you help companies to solve the problem. So I guess there's a lot of different layers to this data management problem. Where do you fit into the architecture?
So I'll use two examples to just get us into the breadth of the quantum products and how we're trying to manage that. And then we can talk about how we're trying to manage that story. One thing we have is we have a product called ActiveScale. It's a S3 compatible object storage. So S3 is the object storage APIs that Amazon uses, and it is the bulk of data being stored on Amazon is accessed via the S3 APIs. And I forgot what S3 stands for. Simple storage system or something like that. And anyway, It's the object storage standard. So we have a product called ActiveScale, and there are other object storage systems out there, and everything's settled on S3 as the data exchange format to what they call put and get objects. We introduced about a year and a half ago a version of the product called ActiveScale Cold Storage, which essentially merges our large tape robot libraries. We're talking thousands of tapes with multiple tens of tape drives and robots that load and unload the tape drives with cartridges and basically maintain a catalog of what all the data is and where it is. We've put that behind our ActiveScale system and basically provide a, not to be too rude, a cheap and deep S3 based object archive that allows you to store data for a long time and be able to fetch it using industry standard APIs with the S3 object interface. So you don't ever see tapes. You don't ever think about tapes. You don't ever think about anything to do with anything other than an object storage interface the same way you would write an application for Amazon storage access. That's one thing we have here. And the important part of that is cheap and deep.
Yeah. For that one in particular, can you help us understand maybe two aspects? What does the cost structure look like from, for that solution compared to maybe a traditional cloud solution? And then what is the latency for accessing data through this, given that there's this kind of physical component of collecting, the hardware?
Yeah. So I'm going to wave my hands a bit here, and maybe I can follow up. When I think of tape, I think 1/10 the cost of disk-based storage. And that comes primarily from the media cost is the dollars per terabyte for the media, the tape versus spinning disk is lower, but also the total cost in terms of density of footprint, real estate in the data center, and power consumption is a fraction of keeping disks spinning, basically to get access to the data. Because the tapes sitting in their little cubby holes, for all intents and purposes, are sitting on a shelf drawing no power whatsoever. And that is absolutely important to basically slamming down the cost. And the other thing about tape versus disk is tape has been shown to be a reliable archive method for storing data for 5 to 10 or more years under, kind of normal storage considerations. Disk, when you think about them, you're looking at 5-year warranties and maximum 7 and a certain population dropout over time. And tape has been a long-term storage technology for things like backups forever, right? It's a well understood, well developed, and well managed technology. What we've done is brought it into the 21st century by putting S3 in front of it. And this is essentially what Amazon did with their Glacier storage tier, which is basically the way to store data there. In access times, I would say you're looking at minutes for accessing a large file. Sometimes you can put together policies to make it shorter, like minute or sub-minute. But your trade-off there is you can store lots of data and then you have an access delay. It's not what I would call, it's a new nearline storage. They used to do this with cheap disks, slower disks, and stored off-site. You'd be accessing data, and it's not online as much as your primary storage, which is now dominated by solid state flash. It's slow spinning disks and lots of them, and it takes a while to access that data. Tape is replacing all of those nearline applications with an even slower and cheaper solution. So that's the trade-off where you put the data to save money.
Yeah, makes sense. So if you're doing something like machine learning, you need to access this to training, then having a latency, that's no problem. You're not going to be running real-time applications on it, but then anyways, you don't need usually huge amounts of data for that. If I look at your use cases, you have 4 that are highlighted here. So 2 of them, long-term data archiving and enterprise backup, seem like very straightforward applications of the technology you've just explained. And then 2, surveillance and security and ransomware recovery. Are they using then the same architecture, or is there different architectures for those solutions? Or what are the other? Because you do have quite a diverse portfolio. What are the architecture use cases?
So we have I would say we have 3 products that are in this space. for the backup, long-term archiving, and ransomware protection and data recovery, right? Obviously, we have the traditional tape libraries, and those tape libraries we sell in traditional backup applications, and we partner with the major backup software vendors that essentially front end our tape and provide data storage and cataloging off of your primary storage systems and put it onto tape and manage the tape robots transparently for you. You basically interact with our product, our tape product, using a backup application, which is typically when people are doing backup application deployment, they're often looking at a single backup solution across multiple storage deployments they have within their data center. And that is kind of the common coin of essentially giving a single interface to all of the backup data. So we have tape applies for traditional backup deployments, but we also have a DXI product line. It's we sometimes call it a deduplicating appliance. I dislike that term. What it is a highly efficient online disk-based or flash-based backup appliance. It can integrate with tape and use tape as essentially a place to offload older data that you don't think you're going to access again. And this is all policy-based. But that backup appliance looks like a tape system, except it's a virtual tape library. Let's just call it that for a second. And the thing about that is it basically is it can crack the data and backup streams and understands, and it pokes around the data and essentially deduplicates and compresses the data. The thing about backup tapes, think about it. Think about your laptop. You back it up today, and your backup software is going, what files changed since yesterday? And if you do a full backup, you say, well, I want a complete image of my system anyway on a weekly basis because I just want a recovery point that gives me a fast restore of the whole system. I don't want to go through incrementals and stuff. Anyway, those backups solutions and backup applications yield lots of duplicate data because there's a lot of data doesn't change. I mean, this is the whole hot, cold data thing, right? The hot data is the stuff you've been working on in the past week, and everything just sort of ages in terms of access, and it just becomes cold. And that's, people randomly talk about, 80 to 95% of your data that's cold, and 5 to 20% of your data that's hot. One AI machine learning application we've been talking to, they're changing the way they're going to store their architecture. They want to move to an on-prem S3 based object storage architecture for all of their data access, are flagging. They think that 30% of their data is hot and 70%, 66%, 33, 70, 30. That 66% of the data is cold, and they want to store that on tape. And basically, we're working through with them on how to automate this and detect the data that's not being accessed and automatically tier it off to lower cost storage while keeping the data that they need for their AI application near at hand on a disk-based system. Or actually, what they're interested in is flash. They're ejecting all spinning disk systems out of their data center and focusing on flash and tape.
Gotcha. Okay, so the magic's really in the software in terms of, doing this analysis of
right,
which data to deduplicate.
Yeah. So the tape system, this traditional tape, there's the DXI virtual tape library appliance that has extraordinary storage efficiency, data reduction capabilities that works well in backup scenarios. And then I mentioned our active scale object storage system, and that, especially with the tape back end, provides an object storage based solution for your archiving or lower tier of storage. We're introducing, and we're getting close to shipping, the version 1.0 of our Myriad all flash array. And that's designed as a primary storage solution for applications like AI, video effects, rendering, and data analytics, essentially things related to AI. And that has to be fast because these applications need to be fed. You're feeding GPUs at a high speed for doing processing on data. GPUs, oddly called graphic processor units, and I think most people don't care about the G anymore. And then there's active scale object storage on a kind of disk and flash based system is being used for a middle tier, medium access speed storage. And then there's active scale object storage with tape backend or traditional tape systems for the lowest cost tier for long-term storage of data that you don't need to be immediately online for immediate access. And so people are looking at that. The thing that we are cranking our innovation beams on is essentially we have the ability to specify policies to automatically move the data between the tiers. Everybody's saving all their data, and you can look up these charts. IDC has the unstructured data growth exponential curve for the foreseeable future. The amount of data that people are storing is impossible to manage manually and to move, and you couldn't hire enough people to actually manage it. It has to be automated. And those automation techniques for moving data between the tiers and keeping the really important data close to where they need to be to the processing in the more expensive primary storage. And I think of flash is 10 times more expensive than disk, which is 10 times more expensive than tape. I just use those numbers to kind of ground myself. You can't do it manually. So you have to have these policy-based things based on last time access of files, age of files, type of files. So this is where it's a lot of metadata analysis on the files to do intelligent auto-tiering of data. And that's where people are interested in talking to us, because we have multiple entry points into their data workflow, and we can automate the management and movement of that data to match their way their business runs and how they use their data.
Yeah, there's a couple other policy topics that I'm, all too keenly aware of, at least here in China, which, one of them is government regulations around where data can be stored, so cross-border flow. And I think this is not only an issue for China, it's an issue for India, an issue for other countries. And then the IFC, so kind of the regulations around what data can be stored when it applies to individual PII. Are these topics that you touch, or are these usually handled somewhere else in the system and then you'll ingest those rules?
Yeah, we absolutely play in this space. So especially things like DXI and ActiveScale, which are meant for longer term data retention, and also for when you think of backups, you basically intersect very quickly with compliance in terms of the HIPAA healthcare regulations, data retention policies for, healthcare, data retention policies, right? Somebody told me in Europe that they need to save my healthcare data for 30 years past my death. And I'm like, well, that's not going to help me any, but maybe it'll help someone else, right? So the policies that are driving data retention require specific support in the products that essentially have immutable data. You can't go around and delete the data. That's the healthcare and kind of compliance stuff. Same thing in legal documentation, right? A lot of financial records, business records, personnel data. These have to be retained for things like 7 years, right? This is just requirement. So you have to make immutable copies of them. And these are essentially, we have capabilities both in ActiveScale or object storage to make immutable objects. DXI has immutable backups that can't be deleted, right? For the object storage system, I talked to our Thomas Demore, our one of our architects. He leads the ActiveScale team now, and I kept beating him into submission, trying, how can I access the data or get rid of it? It turned out I would have to disassemble the system and crush the disks. The software basically wouldn't allow you. You just basically had to go to the hardware level and start really crunching it. The data is stored encrypted, so you can't actually make sense of it without the ActiveScale software. The ActiveScale software won't let you delete it because you put an object lock on it with a retention time, which you set per use case, right? And so, you could destroy the data by physically destroying the machine, but you can't delete the data. It was an interesting conversation because it was frustrating to me because I was looking for a hole, right? So that's kind of important. You did mention, I think, data sovereignty, right? About having data in certain places. We do a lot in the media and entertainment space. This is a big kind of traditional market for StorNext, and we have this file system, the StorNext file system, which is used by every animation, movie production house, sports teams. By the way, a lot of the video production is coming from both the sports teams themselves, regardless of what sport you want to play. And it varies country to country, obviously. And also the things like in the US would be like the Major League Baseball is the overall, or actually ESPN. ESPN is the sports network and stuff. They are saving everything, right? And our StoreNext product is for fast video editing and post-production, is used in all these places, okay? The thing about that is that they have this extreme sensitivity. I've been somewhat surprised. They don't want to store their data in the cloud.
Hmm.
They really want to keep it on-prem. They are extremely paranoid about data leakage, movies being posted online before they even hit the theater. It's the secrecy around all this, and because it all involves how much money they can make off of a marquee debut of a film, say, right? It's just important. And it's not necessarily like the cloud. It's the getting the data to and from the cloud. There's too many points where it could be interrupted or hijacked, right? So a lot of these companies are looking to what we call repatriate data to on-prem for things like intellectual property and sensitive data. So it's not only like government data; it's commercial. The commercial data is driving a lot of the activities we have in terms of the product development and feature development for on-prem deployment of things that they're now bringing back from the cloud, partly out of security concerns.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, we encounter that a lot where we say, to manufacturers, for example, if you just get the data out of your plants and get it into the cloud, there's so much more you can do. You can look at data sets across factories and all this. But in the end, that's kind of, you're tapping into the nightmares of, the executive management team of, okay, maybe there's something interesting here, but what if our competitors get access to our process data? Then, this what if is a significant risk factor that's still top of mind. You're covering a lot of industries. I mean, this is just a problem that every industry has. I guess some of these industries that you're working with are very sophisticated. If you're working with maybe a large media company or a financial institution, some of them might be much less sophisticated in terms of their IT capabilities. Are you typically working with them directly and then helping them to deploy their solutions on-prem or your solutions on-prem at their facilities? Or are you often working with some kind of sophisticated intermediary who's managing the scoping of the project? And what does that mix look like?
The simple answer is both. I would say that one thing that we do a lot of work with a partner is typically, when we're involved in government bids, contracts, and sales, we are often working in the respective countries with a specific vendor that is qualified and approved by a particular government. This is not only the US, but in Europe and I suspect in China too. And that very much is very strong partnership and collaboration to sell into very specific markets with very specific requirements. The bigger companies we work with directly, major movie houses and things. We basically provide them with access to our development team, and we have roadmaps that are driven by their emerging requirements for things they want to do differently in the future, right? But we also have partners. We have very specific partners in media and entertainment. We have specific partners we have this emerging practice I was going to mention before around what we call AI enriched video data. We have this product called CatDV. CatDV is a media asset manager. What does that mean? It basically understands video formats and still images and can break them apart. Essentially allows you to edit, annotate, and transform the videos with this product's been around for 10 years. We bought the company about when I started, actually, December 14th of 2020 was the day the deal closed. Basically allows collaboration, annotation, and transformation of video so that you can essentially do things like add captioning, flag parts of the video, identify people in the videos or objects in the videos. So 10 years ago, this is all manual. And you just basically, so when you watch a video and you see captioning and subtitling, that all used to be manually done, right? And you do, X-ray on Amazon. I don't know if you use Amazon at all. You could do X-ray on Amazon and it'll list the characters on screen in the cast for you, and you could click on the character and see what the background is. All this is rapidly moving to simply AI driven. So we have basically been innovating around CatDV to integrate it with a lot of available AI packages to do automatic language translation for basically redubbing the soundtrack without human intervention, captioning or subtitling in different languages after translation, person identification for essentially which actors, and using a database that's area specific for, say, a certain country. You basically train it with all of the actors and that you have in that country, and essentially run it over the video, and it'll flag who's in there and what scene, and tag the thing so that it's all automated. The accuracy of these tools are approaching 90 to 95%, which, by the way, is sometimes better given what I see as subtitles for languages that I'm remotely familiar with. It's often better than what was done by hand before. The amount of data that you ingest to run the AI programs that you've trained with our equipment, you train the models on facial recognition, and then you run the model over your video and essentially come out with an enriched video result. And then you pump it out and you produce it, and that's your production of your released video for a new market. Eric, this is funny. This is the cost of manually doing it before was prohibitive, such that only certain videos of that was considered to have enough of a market to generate enough revenue were actually they did techniques like this. There's a lot of movies that you could never get that essentially has English dubbing or English captioning because it's just not worth it. There's not a big enough market for English. And I'm a foreign film fanatic, by the way. And it's somewhat frustrating. I sometimes watch foreign films without understanding exactly what's going on. But AI just basically removes all the barriers for it. We are talking to studios, especially in Asia, where there are so many languages that they want to basically release their archives for new markets across Asia. But they are struggling with having to do 10 language translations or subtitling. That would be cost prohibitive except for things that they knew would be winners. And now they're going through their archives and looking to remonetize stuff that's hasn't been, touched in 10 years.
Yeah.
The amount of data we're talking about is flabbergasting. Okay.
Right. Legacy process that's been heavily manual. And because of that, you're only serving, 10% of the population with again, sitting here in China, and, Chinese be desired, right? Maybe this is one of the industries which is best not to be state run. But the reality is very little foreign media actually gets, dubbed into Chinese. So, I'm constantly, just to practice, I wish I had a nice library and, movies or French movies or whatever that properly dubbed in Chinese. And it just doesn't happen yet. I guess if we look forward 5 or 10 years, maybe sooner, right, that people figure out how to do a decent job. Also the voice, right, with AI. I think it's just a matter of time. And I think this is a good transition to my last question, which, because I now have a pretty good understanding of your business today. And so this is certainly not stable, right? This is really a moving market. So what is exciting for you about the future? If you look forward 1, 2, 3 years, what do you see happening either at Quantum or in the landscape around you that's keeping you motivated?
So, I have never been more involved with AI and machine learning applied to data from a storage perspective before I came to Quantum. The company mission to tackle the unstructured data explosion problem and to derive business value from it is pushing us into how do we enable AI and ML techniques? How do we integrate our storage products with the upper application layers, and then using our CatDV program to essentially help customers make sense out of their data and derive business value while lowering the cost of getting that business value generation over generation, year over year. So the thing about AI ML is not that it's not that it's actually providing captioning and translation and stuff like that. it's that the cost of doing it versus a person doing it is so low that it basically blows open the number of use cases and media and data that you would apply it to. So it's a kind of a great democratizer in a lot of ways. And around that, the amount of data that people are storing, we basically have to keep lowering the cost of data while providing the performance needed for critical applications and critical points in the workflow to the data that you want to do that with. Everything else needs to be minimized in cost. It's a difficult problem, and it's keeping us on our toes as we try to look at how the portfolio fits together, how the data moves, how do we simplify the customer's life, how do we automate as much as possible, and then walk hand in hand with them into an AI ML future, right, or AI enabled future that's basically touching every part of their data workflow at this point.
Yeah, great. Well, it's a great problem to be focused on right now. I mean, whether you're a digital native company or you're a company with a 200-year legacy, managing data is core to your success today, right? So it's a problem everybody's struggling with.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, Brian, really appreciate you taking time to speak with us today.
Yeah. Thank you, Eric.
Good. Thanks, Brian.
Okay, take care.
Thanks for tuning in to another edition of the Industrial IoT Spotlight. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at IoT1HQ and to check out our database of case studies on IoT1.com. If you have unique insight or a project deployment story to share, we'd love to feature you on a future edition. Write us at eric.walenza@IoT1.com.